If you run or operate any sort of high ticket offer and are primarily in the info product, coaching, consulting, or online done for you service provider space, I'm going to be breaking down exactly how you can start and scale your high ticket offer, especially if you're trying to acquire high ticket clients that pay you 5, 10, 15, even 25K plus for your online service based offer. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a complete game plan as to first, what's the biggest constraint in your high ticket offer and how you're going to be able to solve that constraint and what actually is going to move the needle in your business so that we can actually grow month over month. So without further ado, let's get straight into the video. So typically when we partner with any sort of high ticket business, there's going to be a plethora of different problems that are occurring inside of it. So there might be a fulfillment issue, maybe there's a sales process issue, maybe we need to fire someone, hire another guy, etc. But ultimately, the biggest mistake that you could possibly do is focus on all of those different problems rather than focusing on the biggest key constraint that if it was fixed, it would allow you guys to actually gain one, more time, and then two, ultimately make more money. And so the biggest thing that you need to figure out and solve first is what's the biggest constraint in the business that if I fixed it today, it would have the biggest lift and ultimately move the needle in the business. And so I like to break that down into typically 3 different categories most of the times. And usually it's a leads issue, a sales issue, or it's in the actual fulfillment process. And so typically, even if you're at like a 50K, 100K, 250, 500, even $1 million a month, no matter what revenue level you're currently at, your problem is most likely going to fall into one of these 3 categories. So real quick, I'll actually run you through an example of what this would look like for a fitness coach. So let's say, for example, working with someone that gets clients online via Instagram and he runs an offer teaching women how to lose weight. So let's say with this guy in particular, he has 100 leads coming in every single month. And with the sales in particular, he's maybe, closing 10% of people. And then ultimately of those people that do end up closing, he ends up getting pretty good results. So in this case, even with the 100 leads, though it's not that many leads, he's only actually closing 10% of people. Whereas if we lifted this just 20%, we doubled the amount of people that he's closing, we're ultimately going to double the business without even touching any of these leads and without even changing anything on the fulfillment. So the biggest constraint in this case would be sales. Now, in that same exact scenario, let's say, for example, he has 100 leads coming in and he's closing, 50% of people and he still gets those good results, right? So ultimately, in this case now, the leads is going to be the issue because he's closing basically half of the people that are coming in. But if he added, 200 leads instead of the classic 100 that he had before, he's again going to double the business by just focusing on that one lever. And the reason I say this is because a lot of times people will focus on the wrong thing, right? They might get a tracking dashboard, maybe they hire out setters, closers, use AI for fulfillment, etc., which all of those things are necessary. But at any given moment, you don't need to do all of those things. You need to just solve the biggest constraint, which is typically one of these things. It's either leads, sales, or fulfillment. And so now I want to go a little bit more in depth in each one of these categories, starting with leads. And the reason that leads is so important is because you could have the best offer, you could have the best close rate, you could even have an amazing fulfillment process. But if you have no one actually knocking on the door, interested in your product, your service, your offering, etc., then it's all pointless because it doesn't matter what sales or fulfillment system you have if no one's actually interested in the product. And so with leads, I like to focus on 2 different things as the biggest drivers into actually increasing the amount of lead flow that you have for your offer. And this is typically like with any sort of online business that's trying to build a brand and build a system of leverage. You want to focus on either the ads side of things or the content side of things, if not both. Now, I know that there's other ways to obviously get leads. You can cold call, you can cold email, etc. And that's really great from going from 0 to 30K, maybe like 50K. But ultimately, if you want to actually build a system of leverage that grows with your brand, you want to actually be leveraging ads and content, and honestly, both at the exact same time. And so we'll start with content first. Typically, whenever we're partnering up with any sort of coach, we're going to focus on 2 main key platforms that we use to be able to, 1, actually generate traffic, and then 2, actually convert the traffic. So with content, I like to break it down into Instagram and then YouTube. So Instagram kind of serves as the traffic creator, right? Or the traffic generator, essentially. And then YouTube is actually the traffic converter. And the reason I say that is because you can basically blow up very, very quickly with Instagram, right? It only takes one reel to kind of pop off. You'll get a bunch of inbound leads, DMs, etc. But you're not going to actually convert or make any money with those leads unless they know who you are, what you offer, and why you're better than competitors, and what kind of result you're actually ultimately going to get that person. But with YouTube, if they're actually consuming your content for a long enough period of time, similar to this video right now, you're going to know who I am, what I offer, why I'm better than competitors, what my entire knowledge base is, etc. And it's going to allow you to actually get closer to making that buying decision because you trust me and and you ultimately will convert on, for example, my high ticket offer. And the reason that this idea is so important goes back to a rule that actually Google did, which is called the 7-11-4 principle. And basically what this states is that for someone to actually convert, especially high ticket if you're selling a service online, they need to actually watch 7 hours of content across 11 touch points across 4 different mediums to actually get to that buying decision. So in this case, if Instagram is the traffic creator, then there's no way that they're going to be watching 7 hours of content just on Instagram, right? You'd have to watch your entire reels for days on end. Whereas with YouTube, they could watch an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of a video and then be much closer to that 7-11-4 principle and actually convert on the high ticket offer. So how we like to think about it is typically Instagram is like your top of funnel, right? So people will find you through Instagram reels usually because they're on the For You page or stories. So they'll find you through short form content. And then they'll be kind of curious as to who you are. But again, they're not going to know who you are or like what you offer. So this stage that they're at is pretty unaware when it comes to like the customer awareness level. But what you're going to want to do is get them down to the awareness level, right? And that's your bottom of funnel, which is going to be YouTube. It's going to be long form pieces of content where people will sit down, watch, figure out who you are, what you offer, and really understand kind of what makes you different and better than competitors. And so again, to kind of go back to that 7-11-4 rule that I was talking about, with the 7 hours of content, they might find you on Instagram Reels and Stories, maybe watch like 30 minutes to an hour there just consuming your content, scrolling through stuff. But then to get your time and watch time up to 7 hours, we're going to want to send them to YouTube so that way they're a lot more warm, because long form content is actually how you're going to convert the audience. Now, with the actual 11 touch points, that can vary a bunch of different ways, right? Because they might come in and watch like 4 or 5 pieces of content there, but then they might get hit with like a retargeting ad. So then maybe they watch an ad, right? Maybe they DM you, maybe they get an email, and then maybe they watch like 2 YouTube videos. Maybe they get hit with another ad. Maybe they watch another reel. So you're kind of trying to build an ecosystem where it's like, even if they watch one of your videos and they follow, you're trying to build an ecosystem where they can get hit from different points. They might get hit through email, DM, SMS, YouTube, Instagram, ads, etc. And that's how you're ultimately going to hit that 11 touch points metric. And now with the 4 mediums, as long as you hit the 7 hours and the 11 touch points, it's very easy to hit the 4 mediums. You're already dealing with IG and YouTube, and then you can add in email, you can add in DM, you can add in SMS. There's a bunch of different ways. So as long as, in my opinion, you hit the 7-11, you'll automatically hit the 4. And while we're on the topic of organic content, let's say, for example, we get people to watch our Instagram stories and reels. Another thing that we like to do is send that traffic over to the DMs. And the reason for that is because the DMs is the highest touch point or highest trust type of touch point that you can have with the prospect. Yes, they're going to read emails. Yes, they're going to get SMS. But if they actually feel like they're talking to the creator or founder or the owner of the business, they're much more likely to make that buying decision. And the reason I say that is because typically when someone's trying to make a buying decision, I like to think of 2 different like core sides of the spectrum, right? So typically like this is the cold prospect, and then here's like where they would close. And you have all this time in between where hopefully you're hitting them with the 7-11-4 rule, which at the end of the day is just information, right? The lack of information is the reason why they're not going to convert, especially if they're cold. So what you want to do is you want to just basically shorten the amount of time it takes for them to make that buying decision and get them closer to making that buying decision here by providing them more information. And so you're going to basically provide them that more information through a DM conversation, through the YouTube, through all of this, the 5 reels, the ads, the DMs, the emails. And again, you're trying to build that ecosystem so that way they're always knowing who you are, what you offer, and they ultimately have enough information to actually purchase your high ticket product. And real quick, before I forget about the DMs, essentially we're not sending people to the DMs so that way they actually convert on the offer, right? Yes, it would be nice if we send a $2,000, $5,000 checkout link and they buy it, but ultimately this isn't e-commerce, this isn't like some D2C brand where we're selling a $30 or $50 product. We actually have to have people hop on a sales call or a consultation, 1, to see if they're actually a good fit for the offer, and then 2, see if we can actually fulfill for them, because we wouldn't want to sell them on a product that we ultimately can't fulfill, and then we run into another bottleneck that we'll have to solve later on. So with the DMs, the best way that you can kind of look at it is you want to set the appointment and you can sell them on the call here, right? That's the best way to think about the DMs, because the DMs is super high trust, right? It's the creator, it's the founder talking to them. And so if you tell them that, hey, you might be a good fit for my high ticket offer, why don't you hop on a call with either myself or the closer or the sales team to see if you're a good fit? It's going to be very easy to sell them on the call. And again, you don't have to sell them after they've gone through all this content. It might come earlier in the actual sales process, maybe like here or here or here, rather than all the way near the close or in the bottom of funnel. For example, if we're looking at all the the nurtured touch points, they might have watched 5 reels, they might have seen a couple ads, and then we could set them on the call here. Or they might have watched a couple YouTube videos, another ad, another reel, a DM, and then we could set them here again. So you have to think about, you're trying to build an ecosystem here where you can basically always set them on a call and always educate them enough to have enough information here to actually make that buying decision and ultimately close. And honestly, I could go on and on about like the actual organic strategy, but I think it's also important to focus on the ads portion as well. So with content, obviously Instagram and YouTube is important. And with ads, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna focus on meta. And the reason for that is because we're entering a very, very unique era, if you're watching this in 2026 going into 2027, where ads and content are almost merging here, right? Because really, really good organic content does extremely well as a paid ad, especially on Meta. And not to mention, if you're building somewhat of a brand on Instagram or Facebook, whatever the platform is, it's typically going to be Meta. So when you're running ads on there, if they click on your ad and then they click on your page, you're much more likely to convert that person because, hey, you have an organic audience. People only buy from people that they know, like, and trust. And now people will immediately get to trust you a little bit more when you have that personal brand. And to go a little bit more in depth on Meta as the actual ad platform itself, there's only one thing that you need to keep in mind, especially if you're running paid traffic for the first time for your high ticket offer. And it's essentially the new update that Meta came out with recently called Andromeda. And the reason that this is so important is because it's completely changed the way that people advertise. You see, before, the entire skill set of media buying, especially on Meta, used to be in the targeting. So it used to be in picking the right lookalike audience, interest stacking, figuring out which psychographics and demographics are going to resonate with the creative that you put out. But now it's completely different. It's actually opposite now. So now what kind of wins is you have to understand that this is an AI layer. So whenever you put out the creative here, it's actually going into this AI layer, which is Andromeda, and figuring out who you're trying to target and who's most likely to convert with the creative or ad that you put out. And then it sends it to your ICP or target audience. And so now the entire skill set of media buying is in the creative and creative velocity. And the people that are actually going to win as advertisers are going to be the people that put out the most amount of creatives that are completely unique and completely different. So before, you could just put out a different hook, change the color scheme, and it might be an ad that ends up printing. But now it's completely different. You have to have completely different messaging, targeting angles to actually win. And that's the creative velocity that I'm talking about. And if you already know that your biggest constraint right now in your high ticket business is leads, then you can probably understand how important the creative process is and having a proper testing strategy to basically test new creatives, find which messaging and angles work, so that way you can continue to double down on those ads and scale efficiently. Now, the biggest mistake that a lot of these offers make is they'll just simply do an ICP change. Now, an ICP change is good. Obviously, you can go from like busy moms, for example, to like 9-to-5 workers. So how I like to approach the creative testing process is, rather than just looking at the ICP alone, I like to put a few different categories to look at so I can see what kind of creatives are going to resonate with which type of audience. And so with that being said, I like to split it up based on the angle, the offer itself, the format of the ad, and then obviously the ICP as well. And so for angle, you can kind of think of this as the actual awareness level of the prospect when they come across your ads. So if you're not already aware, every single prospect has some sort of awareness level to your service, your offering, whatever it may be. So a lot of times people might be completely unaware of, whatever you offer. They might be problem aware. They might be solution aware, or they might even be product aware, right? And so a really, really easy way to actually test new creatives and angles is actually making ads based on where they are in the awareness level stage. For example, if you're in the business funding space, a lot of people might actually be pretty aware of the problem that's in the space, whereas people don't get approved for loans, or it's extremely high APR, but they might not be as solution or product aware and they don't know that you exist or what you offer. Or vice versa, people might be aware of the product or solution that you offer, but they don't understand what kind of problem it solves. So you just have to test each one of these different awareness levels and see what type of angle actually brings in the best type of ICP. And the next thing that you want to kind of focus on when it comes to the creative testing process is the offer itself. And the biggest thing that you need to understand is that when it comes to testing offers, cold traffic is extremely ruthless, right? So you want to make sure that your actual offer itself is cold audience or cold traffic friendly, right? So you don't want a really high risk offer. You don't want an offer that doesn't, create a huge ROI for the person. You want to make sure that it's extremely easy. You want to make sure that it's quick. You want to make sure that the timeline is there. You want to make sure that it's an easy yes. So with your offers, you could test different things. Like you could test a one-time setup fee instead of a monthly subscription. You could test, 0% down. There's a bunch of different things that you could test based on the kind of niche or offering that you have. And for format, it's pretty simple. Obviously, you could test different, statics. You could test video ads. You could test UGC ads. You could test like how-to video ads similar to this one. So you can test the format and see maybe if one format actually brings in the ICP that you're looking for. And for ICP, it's pretty simple. You can just test a different type of demographic, as we did in the example with 9-to-5 workers and busy moms. So like for ads that I run, I might target like fitness coaches in one, but then I might target like business coaches, right? Or relationship coaches. So it really just depends, and you can kind of test and see which one works, because I'm telling you right now, let's say, for example, you're in the fitness coaching space and you test business coaches and your ROAS is much more profitable. I promise you're not going to care about serving fitness coaches if you have a better return on investment with this ICP. So you really just have to test and figure out which kind of sticks. And honestly, that covers basically everything at a high level when it comes to the ad side of things. Obviously, if you're trying to build a profitable personal brand and you're actually trying to generate more leads, and that's the biggest constraint, just focus at the end of the day on ads and content. And with either one, you have a strategy to kind of go in on both. But what if leads really isn't the biggest issue for you? Maybe you have thousands of leads coming in every single month. Maybe you have an organic following on YouTube, Instagram, and maybe you're already doing everything that I've mentioned when it comes to the actual ad platform. But when it comes to actually converting those leads into paying high-ticket clients, it's been a little bit of an issue. And so that leads me to my second constraint that we need to solve, which is the actual sales process. When it comes to sales, there's so many nuanced metrics that you need to look at to actually make the best decisions based on the data. But just for simplicity, there's only really 3 core metrics that you need to look at to actually improve your sales process. And so what I like to do is look at these 3 core metrics. The actual book rate. So these are how many people are actually booking in a call of the leads. So for example, if we have 100 leads in the system and 5 people book in, that's a 5% book rate. You have the actual show rate. So of those people that book in those 5 leads, how many people are actually showing up to the call? And then the actual close rate itself. So of the people that actually end up showing up to the call, how many of those people are actually closing and turning into high ticket clients? And so we'll go ahead and start with the actual book rate itself. With the book rate, you need to understand that the mechanism in which you're actually booking in the call is the setting process. So the setting process is extremely important because it's basically the first time you're actually having an ask of that person. So you're asking them to come on a call, you're asking them to show up, you're asking them to be attentive, and then you're ultimately going to ask them to pay you money. So you want to make sure that your setting process is extremely dialed. Now, when it comes to the setting process, there's a bunch of different mechanisms as to how you can actually set people to hop on the phone. But ultimately, this is going to be your funnel process. So you could simply just have a landing page with a calendar, right? That's like a very, very common way that people actually end up booking in calls. You can book in calls through the DMs like I mentioned earlier. You could book in calls through like email, obviously. It's just the funnel that you're running. So the way that you're getting the traffic in, you want to be able to actually ask for that call and then get them on the calendar. So it could be the landing page, the DMs, it could be email. You could actually have an SDR start calling all your leads if you're collecting the phone number and then getting them on the call that way. And that's kind of the best way to kind of go about the setting process. And it may seem super obvious, but the setting process is one of the most overlooked parts of any sort of high ticket sales process. And the reason for that is because a lot of these high ticket, teams, they'll end up sending their leads to like a generic landing page or generic website, or they'll see if they actually end up booking in automatic through link in bio, but that's not actually being proactive. You're being very, very reactive to whatever the prospect wants. So again, you have to understand that the book rate itself is actually the easiest core metric to lift out of all 3 of these metrics. And the reason for that is because the show rate and the close rate are back end, right? They're back end selling metrics, whereas the book rate's obviously on the front end. They'll click on your website. You're basically talking to them, convincing them to actually book in a call and selling them just on the call, not on the service itself. So if you literally go from a 5% book rate to a 10% book rate without changing anything about the show rate or close rate, you will literally double your business overnight and you won't even realize it. You don't have to change anything else. You just have to double the book rate. And again, it's the easiest metric to actually lift. And so what we like to do is actually optimize all of these things as part of the setting mechanisms and actually build an ecosystem around it rather than focusing on just one core setting mechanism, right? So a lot of teams, what they'll do is they'll just focus on the landing page or they'll just focus on DMs, whereas you need a system that's actually designed to set people on the call and then also convert them on the back end, which will again increase the show rate and close rate, which I'll touch on in a minute. But again, you want to build an ecosystem around the setting process the exact same way that you do around content. So yes, you need a landing page with a calendar. With the landing page style, I would just go like this. Let's say, for example, this is your landing page. Always do headline, sub-headline, VSL here, and then the apply button right here, and then the actual application. And then you're going to take them to a page which is just going to be your calendar, right? That's literally that simple. A lot of people don't even have this set up. You need a video sales letter that basically is like an 8 to 15 minute video explaining who you are, what you offer, why you're better than competitors, and then eventually convincing them to apply here. So apply right here, or book in that call on the calendar here. So it's pretty straightforward there. The other thing that you can also do is actually have a conversation with every single person that ends up following you. So this is extremely good if you run any sort of like organic funnel and you have followers coming in every single day. You should definitely 100% reach out to all of those new followers and say, hey, what made you, follow? Are you just enjoying the content or looking to achieve X, Y, Z? Like for example, if you're a fitness coach, are you looking to lose weight? Are you looking to gain muscle, etc.? These are simple, easy conversations that can actually become sales conversations very, very easily without seeming too salesy, and then end up converting into a call itself. And that's a very, very easy setting goal. Additionally, you want to have an email list where you're sending out emails with value, and then you can set people there. And then not to mention any new leads that come in, if you're collecting name, email, and the most important metric, or not metric, but rather information piece is the phone number, you can literally hire an SDR to call all of those leads within 2 minutes of them opting in. So you want to have that speed to lead and then get them on the calendar to then close. That's extremely, extremely beneficial having an SDR. It's probably one of the most important along with the landing page and the DMs itself. So I would highly recommend to build an ecosystem around your setting process rather than focusing on it being individualized. And honestly, let's say, for example, you're actually booking in a good amount of people. Typically in the industry, 5% book rate is actually well above the industry average. And so the next two metrics that you're really gonna wanna focus on is the show rate and the close rate. And both of these things are back-end. And what I meant by that is they actually requires a back-end selling system to be able to actually have people show up to the call and then close. So if you remember over here, basically we built out a funnel where the prospect has now engaged and consumed an 8 to 15 minute video just explaining who we are, what we offer, why we're better than competitors, etc. But not only that, they've actually put a little bit of skin in the game because they've applied for the program and they've actually booked in a call. So this prospect's actually pretty open to hearing more about your high ticket offer. And because of that, this is the absolute best time to start that nurture process to, one, make sure that they show up to the call, and then two, make sure they're as educated as possible on your offer. So now what we typically do is send all of the traffic after they end up booking in a call to another page as part of the funnel, which is called the thank you page. So basically this page is designed again for only two reasons: to make sure that they're showing up to the call, and then again making sure that they're as educated as possible. So with this thank you page, we've structured it pretty similar to our main like home landing page. We'll have a headline on top just saying, wait, your call is not yet confirmed, and then have another video here that's similar to the VSL, but this is quite short, maybe 2 to 5 minutes long, just explaining the next steps, what to expect on the call. And then most importantly, we actually tell them to say yes on the calendar invite and say that I know the sender, so that way again it shows up on their calendar to again improve that show rate. And then finally, the last thing that we do, which in my opinion is the absolute most important part of this entire thank you process, is the breakout videos that are on that page. So this is a little bit, bad of a drawing, but essentially we'll have, anywhere between like 6 to 8 really short videos just answering the most common objections and questions that we get on the sales call in these videos. So that way, whenever they do hop on that sales call, all of their questions are already answered and they're ready to actually, join or, engage with your high ticket offer. And the reason that these breakout videos are so critical to any sort of sales process is because if you think about it, the breakout videos are actually stemming from sales call transcripts. And the reason I say that is because essentially we'll gather 30, 40, 50 sales call recording transcripts that we get with all these closing calls, and we'll put all of that information into an LLM like Manus, Claude, ChatGPT, and we'll tell it, hey, can you analyze all of these calls and figure out what are the most common objections and questions that are happening on these calls. Then once we gather all that data and we have a sufficient data set, we can basically feed it back into the same exact marketing process on this thank you page and basically put that question or objection as one of these breakout videos here. So that way, again, that question's pre-handled and the closer's actually closer to helping that prospect making that buying decision. So that way they don't have to keep answering the same questions over and over. And so this thank you page system that we have has been responsible for increasing the show rate for some of our partners by 20, 30, even 40%. And honestly, a lot of people in the info coaching space are already pretty familiar with this protocol, but you'd be fairly surprised. There's a bunch of different other high ticket businesses across different niches that aren't following this system. And so we've implemented it for real estate investing companies. So people that are looking for more accredited investors that are typically investing anywhere between 100 to 250K per deal. And even like some home service businesses where the ticket price is pretty high high, and they're actually dealing with a lot of people dropping off as part of their funnel. So this definitely works with any sort of high ticket niche. And honestly, this is a little bit on the border when it comes to that back end selling system I mentioned, because if you think about it, the prospect watched the VSL, they've applied, they booked a call, and then they've consumed the thank you page. So it's a little bit front end, but regardless, there's a bunch of other things that we can implement on the back end to ensure that people are showing up. And so just to kind of reiterate what's happened so far, if you think about our setting process, we collected name, email, and phone number. So it's very, very important that if we're already gathering that information, especially the email and the phone number, that we utilize it as part of our process to help people show up. So what we typically do with every single high ticket offer that we consult is we basically send pre-call emails before the call to the prospect. And these aren't basic generic pre-call emails. We're not just saying, hey, your call's tomorrow, or hey, your call's in 3 hours. These are extremely educational. And the reason for that is because, again, it gives us an opportunity to, one, make sure that they're showing up to the call, and then two, educating them as much as possible on the offer. Because if we look back at the thank you page, the entire premise of the breakout videos were just to answer the questions. And that's just one medium or mechanism that we're helping, people answer their questions. So we can do the exact same thing inside of these pre-call emails. And so we'll typically send anywhere between 1 and 3 emails per day. Now, some teams are able to send more, others less. It really just depends on the niche. But if you think about it, the booking window should only be anywhere between 24 and 72 hours out. If your booking window is any time past 72 hours, the prospect's going to be a lot more cold, and the urgency would have died down after they booked in. So as long as you're sending 1 to 3 per day over 72 hours, it's only 9 emails or so. It's really not that much. But ultimately, don't make the mistake of just sending regular reminders. Make sure that they're extremely value dense, extremely educational. Oftentimes, we'll actually put links to case studies, testimonial videos, client interviews. We'll even send them to our YouTube so that way they can watch long form content and, again, get more warm. So that way, again, prior to the sales call, educated as much as possible, and then showing up ready to actually invest. And not only emails, right? Since we also have the phone number as well, we want to send SMS reminders. We typically don't do a lot of marketing when it comes to SMS. We just keep those as simple reminders saying, hey, your call's in an hour, your call's in 5 minutes. And we'll even send in the 5-minute reminder text the actual link to the Google Meet or Zoom, so that way they have the link right in front of them, so that way they show up to the call. And honestly, this covers most of the back-end selling system. I could go on and on about other things that you could implement. But the next thing that I kind of want to focus on is the close rate, because ultimately you can get as many people to show up to the call, but if you don't have a dialed sales process as far as them actually closing, then you're ultimately just going to get a bunch of leads, a bunch of book calls, people showing up, which is honestly really, really good. But then if you're not closing, you're actually not collecting any cash. And so if there's one word I can describe the close rate and how we kind of look at the close rate, the only thing that I want to keep in mind is frame, right? The only way that someone's actually going to purchase a high ticket product, service, or offering from you is frame and you having more authority than the prospect. At the end of the day, you're doing that prospect a service, right? You might be offering a coaching program, a consulting program. You might be offering your done-for-you service, whatever it is. So you want to make sure that you have frame and you want to have authority on the sales call, so that way there's no confusion as to like, hey, you're doing this for me, I'm doing this for you. It's like, hey, you're here and I'm going to help you get there, and you're going to pay me money for that service. It's very, very simple. This seems very, very obvious, but a lot of closers, and even just if you're the founder taking calls, there's that lack of authority where it's like you're letting the prospect lead the call. But again, you want to have frame, and more importantly, you want to have authority on the call, so that way you can lead the call and you can basically have them say everything that you need them to say to ultimately get them to cross the line and ultimately pay you. And to speak a little bit more on frame, obviously there's the framework of the call as well. So I don't typically look at scripts. I really don't believe in scripts because every single call is different, right? A lot of people are like, hey, follow this script verbatim, but not every single call is like that. One day you might be talking to a busy mom with 3 kids. The other day you might be talking to an A-type person who's a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. It really just depends, right? So you're not going to treat every single call the same, so there's no point in following a script. But what you should do rather is follow a framework that you can follow and kind of manipulate for every single call. So the first thing that I train most guys on when it comes to framework is the actual logistics of the call itself. So what I mean by this is making sure that the prospect has their camera on, making sure that the prospect can hear you, and vice versa. And then most importantly, making sure that the prospect's in an actual buying/quiet environment to be able to take that call on for the next 30 to 45 minutes, right? So this is a big mistake I see a lot of people make. They'll just take the call even if the prospect is walking their dog outside, even if they're driving. What's the chance that they actually pull out their credit card and pay you while they're doing that task, right? It's basically slim to none. They'll be like, hey, I need to actually go back home. I don't have my card on me. We can talk about it tomorrow. And then you're extending that sales cycle longer than it has to be. So make sure that they're actually in a buying environment. And what I often tell a lot of sales teams is if they're not in a buying environment, just reschedule the call when they'll be back. And honestly, that prospect's gonna more than likely respect that closer more because they're actually taking it seriously. The next thing that I kind of focus on is obviously a little bit of rapport. I don't go crazy with the rapport because a lot of people kind of like to overdo it, but I would just typically ask where you're calling in from. That's like basically my go-to thing. And then it transitions into the discovery. So with the discovery, the way I always like to open up calls is I ask what kind of motivated you to hop on the call in the first place. This is a really, really good question. Honestly, I train every single person on that question because basically you give the actual prospect the ability to answer it in any direction they want, and you can kind of gauge their interest level real quick without asking them a bunch of different questions and going down the wrong path. So if they open up saying, yeah, I'm looking to lose weight, if it's, for example, a fitness offer, or I'm looking to gain muscle, you can then ask follow-up different qualifying discovery questions that will go alongside what they're actually looking for or what actually motivated for them to hop on the call. And then after the discovery, which is typically anywhere between 25 to 35 minutes, you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions, making sure that you're pulling a lot of pain. That's extremely big. As part of the discovery, you need to make sure that you pull pain. So oftentimes with questions, depending on the niche, obviously, you can ask how long they've been dealing with an issue and what have they tried in the past? Why did those things not work? Why do you think that this is different? Those are really, really good ways to be able to pull pain and see, if they would actually be a good fit for the high ticket offer. And then finally, what I kind of like to do, and I like to word this a little bit differently, this is the why now question. So I always ask this after I pull the pain, and then I've also done the discovery. So with the why now question, I typically ask, what's got you wanting to make this change now? Why not put this off, 2, 3, 4 months down the line from now? Why are you looking to kind of make a change now? Now, this is an extremely, extremely important question. I highly recommend everyone to ask this because it then puts it in the prospect's mind, dang, I'm actually pretty motivated to make a change and I'm actually willing to make a change. And now they're telling you why they're willing to make a change. So technically, they're telling you exactly why they're willing to pay you now versus actually putting it off. So a lot of times you can really, really pre-handle a lot of your objections by asking that simple question. And then after the why now question, I'll typically go straight into asking for the pitch. Now, I don't typically just go straight into the pitch because it can get a little bit awkward. I'll just ask a simple question like, okay, cool, honestly, you sound like you'd be a really, really good fit for XYZ program. Is it cool if I share a little bit more information on how it would work working one-on-one with XYZ? And then 9 times out of 10, they're gonna say yes, or 100% of the time, they're gonna say yes. And then I'll go directly into the pitch itself. And so with the pitch, the most important thing that a lot of people skip over is not value stacking enough. Now, this is extremely, extremely crucial because basically you haven't yet pitched the pricing, and so they don't know how much it's going to cost yet, which is by design. But now you have the opportunity to basically value stack and just list the deliverables one by one so that it feels like they're getting as much as possible before you actually mention the price. So, for example, if it's with a fitness offer, you're going to get a personalized meal plan, you're going to get a personalized nutrition plan, you're going to get one-on-one access, you're going to get a supplement stack, you're going to get access to a longevity partner or doctor. You can basically list everything out, and it feels like they're getting an immense amount of value before you actually pitch the price. And that way, when you do pitch the price, it makes a lot more sense based on everything that they're actually getting. And then finally, I'll go into the actual price itself. Honestly, after I mention the price, I don't say anything. I don't mention anything else. I just stay very quiet, or I pretend to do work somewhere else because ultimately they just need a couple moments to actually gather their thoughts, think about the entire discovery, pain, why now, asking for the pitch itself. And so sometimes people just need a couple minutes to really just compartmentalize everything that just kind of went on the call, and then take a second to actually gather out the logistics of them paying. So just then after that point, I pitch the price. And then ultimately, if, for whatever reason, they have a few more questions, I'll handle any sort of objections and questions about the call. But ultimately, if you did everything that I mentioned in the video so far, all of your marketing process should have actually answered all of these questions. And so you're doing something right on the marketing side when you have no objections and questions and people are just down after you mention the price. And then after that point, you finally close the deal and you're ready to actually onboard that client into your high ticket offer. And yes, there's a bunch of more nuance that actually goes into closing. I could go on for days on end, and I'll probably make another video specifically on just closing itself. But just for the simplicity of this video, because it is a crash course, now we're gonna go to the last and final layer of the possible constraints inside of our high ticket offer, which is the actual fulfillment. So yes, we've solved honestly one of the two biggest issues. Luckily, fulfillment is relatively easy compared to these two because client acquisition will always be a little bit more difficult given the fact that ad costs are rising, given the fact that organic content has become a lot more competitive. But with fulfillment, let's say for example, we've already generated leads, we've already closed the client. Now the most important aspect actually comes into play where it comes to actually fulfilling the service, which if you have a system that leverages AI, it becomes extremely, extremely easy. And the reason I mention AI is because nowadays you can quite literally automate 99% of your work with AI. Whereas before, if you ran any sort of like done for you service offer, coaching, consulting, etc., you had to manually onboard clients, manually do work, check in with clients, etc. But now with AI, all that stuff's taken care of. And the beautiful thing about it is you can actually automate all of your fulfillment as soon as you actually close the client back in the sales process. So what we do, especially if we're working with a client on the sales/operations side, is as soon as that client ends up closing, what we want to do is then build out an onboarding automation. And the reason that this is so important is because we can quite literally automate when it comes to everything client related from the actual time of the close. So what we'll typically do, depending on what kind of contract agreement software that you use or like the payment processor, we'll make sure that the first step of the onboarding actually stems from the actual payment itself or from the contract itself. So we make sure that both of those things are signed and paid for, obviously. And then what we'll do is we'll send them an email with next steps, and we'll make sure that they fill out an onboarding form. And so the reason that this form is so important is because you can quite literally gather every single ounce of information that you need from this client to be able to fulfill on them from that single form. So we make it extremely comprehensive. It takes an hour plus to actually fill out, especially if it's a very, very unique and nuanced service. And then what we'll do is we'll take all that information, plug it into AI to actually fulfill on the service, because we have all of those SOPs on the back end. So again, the form goes here, and then it's fed into all the SOPs. And then you can kind of just check in with the client at that point. Obviously, this is extremely high level. Like, it's not going to work like this. There is a little bit more nuance, but at a high level, this is really all we're doing. We're making sure that the onboarding is stemming from payment and contract. We're sending an email so that way we have that first touch point. There's no post-purchase regret. We're making sure that they fill out the form, and all of that information from the form gets fed into the SOPs that we have that are able to fulfill and execute on the service. And then we just continue to check in with that client to make sure that, that service is actually being delivered. And so obviously, if you're closing a bunch of different clients, you want to make sure you have an extremely dialed in process when it comes to your client fulfillment and client success, because ultimately you could have the best lead generation strategy. You could be closing clients every single day, but if they're not happy, you're getting a bunch of chargebacks and disputes, then ultimately the fulfillment side of the business is going to continue being the biggest constraint. So what we typically do whenever we're partnering up with a client, especially on the operations/fulfillment side, is we'll make sure that one, they obviously have access to the coach and founder, but then we'll also get them staffed with an account manager or a CS. Now, the reason this is so important is because now this coach and founder can focus on other higher leverage tasks like making content or high level fulfillment, whereas this AM/CS can actually just answer any sort of questions or concerns that the client has. And then additionally, if this coach and founder gets a little bit too bogged down with work, what we'll also do is hire them an assistant coach to actually help with the fulfillment process as well. But honestly, a lot of these info product coaching programs, consulting programs, they usually have this foundation pretty well set. But the biggest reason as to why people have a negative connotation with some high ticket offers is the lack of communication. So what we make sure we do is we make sure that everyone has a dedicated Slack channel to be able to communicate with that client. Because if that client has an individualized Slack channel with just them, the coach, the AM, and the assistant coach, then it's going to make for a much smoother process when it comes to fulfillment. And when you communicate issues to that client, it seems a lot more real and a lot more intimate. And at a high level, this is honestly all you really need. You just need to be able to have an onboarding process that's automated, that basically goes all the way until creating the Slack channel with, sending out the form, sending out the email, etc. Now, there's a bunch of other different things that you could do. You could create your own hub, you could create your own communication channel, you could create your own AI platform to actually host people and clients. But honestly, at a high level, this is all you really need to be able to make sure that you're fulfilling in the best way possible. And honestly, that kind of covers everything that I have for fulfillment, especially when it comes to high ticket offers. Obviously, there's a bunch of other nuance that goes into customer and client success, and I'll probably make a completely other YouTube video on it. But at the end of the day, the only thing that you need to understand, just to kind of wrap things up, is there's always one key core constraint in your business, is either leads, sales, or fulfillment. And if you're not doing the one that's the biggest constraint at any given moment, you're actually doing yourself more harm than good. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be dropping videos just like this one every single week, going over how to start and scale different high ticket offers across multiple different verticals. And so if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.